Imagine leaving everything you know behind, not once, but 3 times over the course of 87 years, from the timbered villages of pre-industrial Germany to the dust-blown river ports of the Australian outback, and finally to the green hills of New Zealand. Maria Rosina Katharina Wecker lived a life defined by movement, resilience, and reinvention. This is the story of a woman who crossed continents, survived grief and violence, and held on to her identity through the upheavals of the First World War. Stay with us as we follow Rosa across 3 horizons and uncover the grit that shaped her extraordinary life. And if you enjoy stories like this, please give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing so you don't miss the next chapter in our family history series. Rosa's story begins in 1836 in Friedrichsruhe, a small rural settlement in the Kingdom of Württemberg. It was a world on the edge of change. The kingdom itself was stable, but life for a Lutheran farming family like the Weckers would have been becoming increasingly difficult. Partible inheritance, the practice of dividing land among all heirs, had carved farms into ever smaller plots. By the time Rosa was born, many families were trying to survive on land that could no longer support them. Add to this the climactic extremes of the 19th century Little Ice Age, and food prices soared beyond what many rural families could manage. Daily life revolved around the agricultural year and the strict rhythms of the Lutheran parish. But for young people, the future was narrowing. Without land or the legal right to marry and establish a household, many looked outward. Australia, with its promise of wages and land, became a beacon. Then came Rosa's personal turning point. Between 1857 and 1858, both of her parents died. At 22, she was alone in a village that could no longer offer her a future. Her brothers had already left for Australia. In October 1860, Rosa followed them, boarding the Mary Ross in Hamburg and leaving behind the only world she had ever known. Rosa arrived in Melbourne in early 1861, stepping into a colony still pulsing with the energy of the gold rush. She settled in Sandhurst, today's Bendigo, where she likely found familiarity in the immigrant Lutheran community. There she married Henrik Matheson, a Danish stonemason, in a Lutheran ceremony. Even on the far side of the world, Rosa was anchoring herself to the cultural and religious traditions she had grown up with. And life in the Goldfields was changing. By the time Rosa arrived, Sandhurst was no longer a scatter of tents, but a booming provincial city. Its wealth from a decade of gold mining visible in new banks, churches and public buildings. As a stonemason, Henrik may well have found steady work in this expanding landscape, and Rosa began raising her young family in a community that was becoming more settled and prosperous. Yet even in a thriving town, life could turn suddenly. By the mid-1860s, Henrik was dead, leaving Rosa a widow at just 30, with 2 small children and no safety net. At this crossroads, Rosa might have looked to her own family for support. Her siblings had also made their way from Württemberg, but they had gravitated towards the burgeoning colony of Queensland. Her sister Mary, along with her brothers Friedrich and George, were all carving out a significant legacy in the north. In the growing townships of Brisbane and Toowoomba, the Wecker name was becoming one of prominence and success. Her siblings established themselves as influential figures in trade and their local communities. building lives of relative security and social standing within the established colonial fabric of the northern cities. Yet for Rosa, this family network remained hundreds of miles away. It is a striking detail of her journey that, despite the prosperity and established presence of her siblings in Queensland, there is no evidence she ever physically reconnected with them or sought their support. While her family flourished in the coastal cities and fertile uplands, Rosa's path continued in parallel but in isolation. Instead of retreating toward the safety of her kin, she pushed further inland, toward the pastoral frontier along the Darling River in New South Wales, a bold move for a young widow in a harsh colonial world. By the late 1860s, Rosa had reached Wilcannia, a bustling river port where paddle steamers carried wool and supplies along the Darling. It was a frontier town of pastoralists, merchants and rivermen, a place where fortunes were made and lost. In 1868 she married again, this time to James Comerford, an Irish-born bricklayer who would later become a publican and landowner. Their marriage bridged two very different worlds, German Lutheran and Irish Catholic. They chose neutral ground for their wedding, a Church of Scotland service in the local schoolhouse. As the years passed, James prospered, eventually taking over the Crown Hotel. Rosa managed a large household and navigated the challenges of a town shaped by drought, river levels, and the rhythms of the pastoral economy. But behind the facade of prosperity was a darker reality. In 1887, James appeared in court for a violent assault that left Rosa with 2 broken ribs. The fact that he received 4 months of hard labour, in an era when domestic violence was often ignored, speaks to the severity of the attack. Less than a year after his release, James was found drowned in the river. Rosa, now 52, was widowed for the second time, but this time she was not destitute. As executrix of an estate valued at over £6,000, she was among the wealthier residents of Wilcannia. For the next 18 years she lived independently, managing her affairs and raising her younger children in her home on Wood Street. In 1906, at the age of 70, Rosa made her third and final migration. She boarded the Waikari and sailed for New Zealand to join her youngest daughter Emily. It was a remarkable decision, to begin again in a new country at an age when most people were settling into retirement. She lived with Emily and her German-born son-in-law Otto Jerusalem, eventually moving to a farm in Aucaltry. But the past followed her. When the First World War broke out, the family's German heritage drew suspicion. Otto was investigated as a potential enemy alien. It is in the police files that we finally hear Rosa's own voice. An informant recorded her saying that England was to blame for the misery of the war. A dangerous opinion in a climate of wartime hysteria. Even after 50 years in the British colonies, Rosa remained fiercely attached to her German identity. Rosa died in 1923 at the age of 87. She was buried with Anglican rites, a final shift in a life that had crossed borders of geography, culture and faith. She was a woman of exceptional range and unshaken conviction, someone who carried the spirit of Friedrichsruhe across the oceans to the very edge of the world. When we research our ancestors, we often begin with the basics: births, marriages and deaths. But to understand who they were, we often need to look at the moments when things went wrong. For Rosa, 2 documents reveal more about her character than any parish register ever could. The 1887 assault trial, which shows her resilience and willingness to seek legal protection, and the 1914 police informant report, which captures her voice, her politics, and her defiance. If you're looking to understand an ancestor, look for them in court records, police files, or wartime registration documents. These moments of conflict often reveal the personality behind the name.